I think that once collapse occurs, I think that humanity will be far better off because we'll be learning to live as neighbors again, we'll be living in communities, we'll be at tune with the planet, we'll be growing our own food, for example, we'll be respecting our air and water like we used to do. We will be consuming far less. We won't be so concerned about getting the latest fashions. And we'll just be living together as effective and loving communities on the planet.
This is Peak Moment. We are living at a peak of human innovation, information, wealth, and health. But we're also at a peak of population and consumption, with rising temperatures and declining resources fueled by cheap oil and gas. Peak Moment Television, bringing you examples of positive responses to energy decline and climate change through local community action.
Hi, welcome to Peak Moment. I'm Janaea Donaldson, and my guest today is Dr. Guy Prouty, who's an instructor in anthropology at Oregon State University and Eastern Oregon University. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to be here.
You're working on a book that's looking at how ancient civilizations, their rise and fall, what can we learn from them? Is that sort of the little gem?
Yes, that is basically the essence of the book that I'm writing, is about what we can learn about the rise and fall of ancient civilizations and what it means in today's modern day societies.
You mean we can learn from them because we might have some similar things we ought to learn about?
Exactly. I see a lot of similarities and patterns.
Tell me about them.
Well, first let me introduce something, what is known as marginal returns on investment, and it's related to energy. When we're looking at social societies that have energy flowing through them, is that as societies start to become more complex, say we go from a hunting and gathering society to an agriculture society to a fully developed civilization, which occurred roughly 5,500 years ago, we have increasing energy being put into that system to maintain it.
Okay, so you're looking at energy, be it horses or humans or
human energy,
coal
horses,
or energy to
right.
just transport and food and
exactly.
Okay.
But as societies become more complex, they start to become less efficient because we have a lot of parts built into that system. The energy that goes into the system becomes less well utilized, let's say. And that leads to what is known as decreasing marginal returns. And this is based on the work of Joseph Tainter, who is an archaeologist who wrote a phenomenal book back in 1988 called The Collapse of Complex Societies.
The Collapse of Complex Societies.
And so when we're talking about decreasing marginal returns, we're talking basically about how as societies become more complex, the system can start to break down if we have a lot of problems start to occur to that society. So, for example, if there's a environmental problem starting to occur, if there's bad economic policies, if you have poor agricultural productivity, or the health of the population starts declining, all these factors intertwine into that system, which is already kind of weak sometimes because of the decreasing marginal returns. It can lead to a collapse. And when collapse occurs, it just means that the cycle is completed. In other words, we go back to a simple level of complexity again.
So it's like you become more and more complex, more energy put in, but as that return on energy gets marginal, and it's too complex, it has to collapse some, not turn into smithereens, but it's a simpler form of
It's a simpler form of social organization,
okay.
yes.
Right.
And that has occurred throughout prehistory and history, and every civilization has gone through it, in fact, many times, and it will occur here in the United States as well.
Oh, no, I'm sorry, we're ahistoric. I mean, that's part of our belief, isn't it? I mean, others have gone that path, but we're at the pinnacle of human civilization. I mean, I think I'm being facetious, but I think there are a lot of people who feel that way, and surely that couldn't happen.
Oh, it will definitely happen. It's just a matter of when.
What will cause that? What have you learning from the other societies that may be important for us to be looking at? What clues do you have that will happen here for us?
Well, it's complex. I mean, there's no one simple answer. I guess one of the examples I like to look at is the Western Roman Empire. They had overextended themselves by trying to conquer other nations around them. Okay, so for example, when they sent out forces into Britain, for example, and they built up what is known as a Hadrian's Wall to keep out the barbarians. They had really, over time, overextended themselves.
So they had all their troops out here trying to do various things everywhere, and they just couldn't keep all of that supplied.
Right. It's called overreach. And the United States has done the same thing with our military, because we spend over $500 billion a year on our military per year, which is several times combined the military budgets of all other nations combined. You know, that's overreach, and the troops now are underfunded, and they're
not the only thing underfunded. I would guess it happened in Rome as well, is that other parts of society got the short shrift, as education is doing now, and healthcare.
Exactly,
and things.
exactly. Prior to the collapse of the Western Roman Empire under Augustulus in AD 476, we had various rulers who were really doing quite well for Rome. For example, under the rule of Caesar, they were reaping so much gold from their exploits of other countries, especially from Persia, which is modern-day Iran. They were doing quite well. Their marginal returns on investment were quite high. The population was well fed. He was giving free wheat to the population. So they were doing really well, but over time they just overextended themselves, and their communication systems started to break down as well. And there's some other factors involved as well. But the thing is over time, over a period of a few hundred years, the system got so complex and so unwieldy by just basically overextending themselves that the Roman Empire collapsed in AD 476. And it just split apart.
Right.
Yeah.
So you mentioned there can be economic reasons, there can be military, there can be ecological.
Yes.
There's a lot of factors.
Exactly.
So in our time, what kind of factors do you see that may be pointing in clues? Are we pointing in that direction? And tie that to the old
definitely.
cultures?
Well, first thing, military budgets.
Yeah.
We're spending way too much on the budgets for the military. Our basic economic system, which is a capitalist system, which is flawed, because it's based on an economic system where we have maximum profits in the shortest amount of time possible.
Okay.
That is not sustainable, especially with the limited amount of natural resources we have on this planet.
On the finite planet,
On a
you
finite
just
planet.
can't doing more profit and more growth forever.
No.
So, okay, we've got that one headed for disaster.
Yes.
Or already being a disaster.
Right. Peak oil is another important problem that we're facing right now, and it's going to continue to increase in seriousness as time goes on.
And you're talking about energy. I mean, you talked about energy inputs, and of course that's our primary energy input into this whole global experiment that we have.
Exactly. And so we're fighting wars right now for the last remaining oil resources that are out there. And according to the World Wildlife Fund and some other organizations, we had exceeded the carrying capacity of the planet a number of years ago. In other words, there's just too many people on the planet for the amount of resources that are available to us.
And it's still rising. I mean,
It's
we're
still
still
rising.
demanding. Our population
Right.
is still going up.
Exactly.
As if for forever.
So that's another challenge we have to face. Another thing is climatic change and global warming. It's not only increased temperatures, but it's going to be specifically decreasing water shortages.
Yes, I mean,
So-
we're certainly getting less snow than we did in our California,
Right.
and you in Oregon.
Exactly. So with these type of issues facing us is that it can really create significant problems for maintaining our way of life that we have grown accustomed to. And if you think about it, when I look here in Eugene, I think of the dramatic changes we've had in just 200 years. Imagine just 200 years ago. We had the Kalapuya Indians who lived in this valley, several thousand of them. But if you look in a period of just 200 years, that is just a very dramatic change. I mean, look where we're at now.
Thousands and thousands of people with cars and buildings and
exactly.
all kind. I mean,
Exactly.
huge footprint, as they would say.
So the rate of that change has just been dramatic.
Right.
And unfortunately, we have overshot the planet as far as our economies and the natural resources that are available, and warfare. I mean, it's just these problems can attenuate so that it creates a situation where if we have more severe economic problems, which I think they're coming, especially with our debt, especially in this country, we're $8 trillion in debt, which is phenomenal.
Both our national debt and, I mean, our governmental debt and private debt?
And private debt is even higher than that,
Wow.
I believe.
Wow.
So, you know, we're trillions of dollars in debt, and we're trying to pay that off, but there's no way that we can pay that off the way they're doing things now. So all of these over time lead to decreasing marginal returns, is that the system becomes weak. And what can happen is that collapse, when it occurs, it may be a global collapse,
Really?
rather than just a nationwide
Not just
collapse.
ours, not just because we're overextended in every
Because
realm.
everybody's overextending. I mean, since we're all basically facing the same issues of overpopulation, of climatic change, of overextending ourselves as far as natural resources. I mean, for example, China is growing at a phenomenal rate of 9 to 10% per year. India is not far behind. They want to live the American type of lifestyle, which again is not sustainable. Is that I just see that it could be a global calamity.
Because we're all over.
We're all right,
extended.
exactly. We're all overextended.
So he's saying there needs a power vacuum of
Yes.
sorts, but we may all sort of do that, you know, one right after the other, or we're all so interconnected. I could imagine
We're so
it
interconnected, and
in a way that the ancient world wasn't.
Right.
this
We're
way.
a global economy now.
Yeah.
And for example, if the United States dollar, for example, is threatened by the euro, especially with petrodollars. For example, if Iran and other countries want to start selling their oil in the euro rather than the dollar, that can spell economic disaster for the United States. And
Because
once
a lot
that
of
occurs,
countries
it'll affect everybody else because of that integrated system.
Yes.
And again, because that system is so complex and so interrelated, when events like that occur, that are an economic shock, it can lead to an economic collapse. But then again, since we're a global economy, it could occur globally.
So when we start to look at collapse coming down to a simpler level, right?
Yes.
That sounds like, how might that transition be? I mean, and what are we headed? I mean, then what happens?
Well, I think
What could happen, I should
I
say.
think that the transition is going to be very dramatic. I can't say when that will occur, or how long of a period that will occur. It could be fairly abrupt, or it may go off, or
Just
last
just
maybe
a
last
decline?
for another decade or two.
Uh-huh.
It's hard to predict. I can't tell what the future's like. But based on
Darn.
but based on what I've seen in prehistory, is that when shifts occur like that, it can be very dramatic for the people. But sometimes the people want collapse to occur. For example, with the Western Roman Empire, the citizens of Rome were so heavily taxed by the bureaucracy, and they knew of invading armies coming in, primarily from Germany, that the peasants basically wanted collapse to occur because they know life would be better
Really?
under different
the-
rule.
Yes, then the heavy taxation.
Right, they would
that
no
were
longer be
under.
taxed and things would be simplified. So I think when we're looking at our transition, is that there could be some population die-off, starvation, disease.
Even in the United States.
Even in the
here,
United
Even in the
States.
wealthy United States
Oh,
here.
you bet, sure. Yeah, we are not immune to how these systems operate.
Well, we're certainly not immune to things like flus or pandemics or
No.
or
No.
a drought that would cut all of our grain.
In fact, collapse has already occurred for billions of people around the world. Look at the rate of poverty around the world already. I mean, we're the very fortunate few to live like we do. So collapse has already occurred. But here in this country, I think it'll come as a shock to most people.
I mean, we're expecting a bright, shiny future forever. I mean, that's what we've had. Yeah.
Right. But I think that once collapse occurs, and if we can go through that transition as smoothly as we can, if we can take definite, unique approaches to trying to deal with it, how we're going to deal with this period during this transition, I think we'll be much better off when we attain that final level of simplicity.
You got me curious about the final level of simplicity and what might that look like. You've also got me interested in what can we do. Let's go back to the transition. What can we do to sort of make a smoother landing?
Okay, well, there's several things we can do. Let's look at energy, for example. I think that start decreasing our energy usage dramatically. Get rid of your car if you can. Use mass transit.
You biked over here,
yes,
so you
bike,
can talk
yes,
about it.
Yes, bike. Use mass transit. Get out of debt as much as you can. Mm-hmm. Don't stay in debt like most Americans are. Get rid of the credit cards. Learn permaculture. Mm-hmm. Start planting your gardens. Learn to grow your own food again. And develop community. I think that's very important too. Because we used to live in communities together, but most of us now live out in these suburbs, and we're a very lonely people. In fact, I read a recent article about that in the New York Times, how a good percentage of the American population feel very lonely because they're isolated in these big mansions out in the suburbs, and there's no sense of community.
There isn't community. I mean, it's everybody in their little walled-off little estate, and you don't know who's next door, and people go away to work in the middle and school, and they're empty.
Right. So I think that community development is going to be essential. We've got to learn to depend on each other again for food and resources, tools, knowledge, and I think that's going to be very essential. And if we can learn to simplify our lives by not consuming as much, boycotting the corporations.
Boycotting the corporations. All right. Buying local. Producing local.
Right. Producing local.
Producing less.
Decentralizing as much as possible. Decentralizing and becoming very local. Which is going to be
a challenge here because so much of American industry has gone offshore.
Exactly.
Someone had told me that we no longer produce shoes anywhere in the United States.
Yes, 99% of the shoes imported shoes are from China.
Wow.
Yeah.
So if China got unhappy with us one day, which at the moment they need our dollars, but if they got what do we do?
Well, it's like that for a lot of resources. Mm-hmm. Not only shoes, but China, for example, right now is hoarding concrete, copper, and some other vital elements as well, because they're preparing for peak oil too. So it's expensive to transport these type of materials overseas, so they're heavy, so they're hanging on to it.
So, there'll be some kind of transition, and what you've given us is some guidelines to how to sort of use less energy, right?
Definitely, use less energy.
What you're talking about is simplifying so that our lives are less complex, using less energy in all forms.
Yes.
So that you're, in a sense, voluntary collapse. Could we think of it that way? Personally, building community, we're voluntarily simplifying and using less energy.
And I think that's a good thing, because it's going to be essential to our survival once collapse occurs. We are going to have to live in a community again, in localized communities, because we're no longer will be able to get food and other resources from thousands of miles away. That's just not going to be possible. And I don't really believe that we're going to have technological advances in fossil fuels to enable us to do that down the road. So we really
or some other miracle, something.
Or some other miracle.
Can't we hope for?
Well, it comes down basically to a change in human behavior and a change in human consciousness. I think that's going to be vital for us.
So you do say a word about each. Change in behavior, simplifying.
Simplifying, exactly.
What's the change in consciousness?
I think the change in consciousness is going to involve that we have to think of ourselves as one with the planet, and we're one with each other. We're all brothers and sisters on this planet.
It's a big change. Instead of thinking of the planet as one big resource that we can, we can use up.
Right. And again, that's a challenge for a lot of people, especially from people who believe and practice fundamentalism, because they literally believe in the Bible that we are here to exploit all the Earth's resources, and a lot of these fundamentalist Christians believe in Armageddon, so they don't really care about our environment.
How things turn out.
How things turn out, because they're preparing for the second coming of Christ and so forth.
Right.
So, to me, I think that is dangerous.
So that lacks the kind of care and respect for the planet's long, ongoingness.
Right, because the climate is changing. We're very adaptable. We live through a lot of different climatic changes. We've lived through very well through the end of the Pleistocene, which is the last ice age that ended roughly 11,000 years ago. So we know how to adapt to cold, and it's going to get hot.
We're going to find a way to adapt.
We're going to find a way to adapt to the increasing heat and lack of water. But the thing is that in order to successfully to do that, we'll have to really change our behaviors and our consciousness and how we relate to the planet.
You can't keep using it up.
We can't keep using it forever and ever. I mean, it's not a sustainable.
So where do you
livelihood.
think we could, we make the transition, however we make it. Some of us make it through. Some of our folks. What can you envision for that in our last 5-6 minutes here? What can you envision in what we could be coming to?
Well, I think that by living in community again, in neighborhoods or intentional communities, eco-villages. I'm interested in joining an eco-village in Canada. I spent a summer there last summer there and found it a very rewarding experience. And I know that by living in community and working with each other and learning from each other and sharing resources, it was a great period of growth for me. So I think things like that, getting to know your neighbors, again, living more simply. Don't try to get rid of your television, for example. I think is a very important thing to do, because our culture constantly begs us to consume and buy and consume and buy.
So part of that, of course, is to step away from the consuming
stop away from the
lifestyle.
the consumption. Yes.
And on the other side, so we make it through. What I hear is closer connections to one another, not so isolated as we've been.
Definitely.
And probably less complex cities. I mean, will cities survive?
Well, that depends. I mean, new urbanism has been developed, and basically they argue for more intensive community or more intensive population centers within cities, where you can walk to different businesses, grocery stores, and so forth, and that may be possible. I mean, that's certainly an avenue, but I think that population levels in cities will definitely drop as people scatter out for more rural areas where the food is being grown. But again, as we've learned from Cuba, a lot of food is being grown within Havana itself. And
it's going to have to be, because if you don't have if transport is so expensive, then you're going to have zones where you've got farmers right in the urban and close by the urban areas. And all of those areas have been taken over for suburbs. I mean, we don't do we even have enough arable land to feed the population of America left?
Well,
not without a lot of transport, I would
think
guess.
that if we do it smartly and using permacultural practices, yes. And I think that we have to not build any more suburbs. We have to intensify our use of the good soils that are remaining. For example, here in the Willamette Valley, we're the world's leading producer of grass seed.
Well, that's right. Lawn grass seed. I mean, not something you can eat. I mean, the world doesn't, need more lawns.
Right, exactly.
Need a lot of water.
So I think that in my view, we should get rid of those fields for grass and start growing crops again.
It's going to take
for people.
We've got 2.5 minutes. Steve, is there anything you've learned from your study so far that you want to bring forward into this time, what we haven't covered yet?
Well, I think that when we can learn from prehistoric civilizations, such as the ancient Maya, or the Chinese, or the Egyptians, or the ancestral Puebloan in the American Southwest, that all civilizations go through a cycle of rise and fall and collapse, and then rise and fall and collapse. And I think that by examining what they did after collapse, or during the period of collapse, we can learn a lot from them. So, for example, I think of the ancestral Puebloan in the American Southwest, which are also known as the Anasazi, although that's not the correct term, is that they knew that when collapse was occurring, that they had to leave the area. They had to go to more well-watered areas. So I think we really have to take effective change on our part when we're saying, okay, things aren't working here, we're going to have to do something different, or else it means the end of humanity as we know it. It's going to have to be some dramatic changes. So we're going to have to change our behaviors and open up the box in our heads and think, we got to think outside that box on how to do things more effectively.
I think that we may also find ourselves needing to learn from some of those cultures that went through the cycle and came back in a different form, and how did they do it? So I'm hoping that some of what you uncover for us can give us some clues, and you've given us some clues, to it's also, there's a promise in there, I hear. The collapse isn't the end.
Collapse is not the end, no.
It's just a change of state.
It's a change of status. In fact, the rise and fall of civilizations is a naturally occurring process. It's just the way things have operated since the first cities in Mesopotamia were built 5,500 years ago.
Odd as it sounds, it feels very reassuring to know that the collapse that we're heading for is, we're in good company. It's actually a natural cycle.
It's a natural cycle.
And let's navigate it as best we can.
Yes, definitely.
Thank you. This has been very interesting and hopeful, even in the midst of dark news. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
So you're watching Peak Moment, Community Responses to a Changing Energy Future. I'm Janaea Donaldson. Join us next time.